Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Modern Living with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Today's episode is 5 signs that your relationship is over. Well, we know that many times things just aren't going right in relationships, but you can't quite put your finger on what's going on in yours. Well, we're going to give you some signs that it may be starting to fail. So if you're not sure, I don't want you to turn into the FBI or, a police officer or anything like that. But you do need to sit back and assess what's going on. Now, most relationships will go through their ups and downs. So don't panic if you happen to be going through a little bit of a dry spell. But a dip that's been longer than a month, you may want to really investigate. Sometimes the signs are kind of screaming, this is a point of no return. If you are there, then of course my suggestion is going to be seek out a counselor or coach that can help you with your relationship. But knowing when to fight for your relationship and when to let go are key to keeping a healthy sense of self. Sometimes it's just a very small problem that has just, because there hasn't been any attention given to the issue, it's just blossomed into something that it really should have never been. Well, we have two sponsors for our show today. Our music sponsor is Tony Woe and his album God Box. That's Tony, W-H-O-A, Tony Woe. And our show sponsor is Dead Man Rising. The film will be coming out in 2016, and it is their Indiegogo account that is sponsoring our show today. So thank you so much to Dead Man Rising and Tony Woe for their sponsorship. So let's get started. So what are these 5 signs? Now, I must tell you, there are more than 5 signs, but we just don't have time to go over all of the little things that you need to notice. Nor do I want you to become paranoid in your relationship, because sometimes something is just an incident. It doesn't mean that it's a thing, okay? So remember that. Again, we're looking at things that if this has been going on for quite some time, they are in no particular order. Number 1, more new friends are starting to be around. Now, I may say he or I may say she, him, her, but this goes across the board. It has it's gender neutral. So you notice that your significant other is starting to bring more and more friends around, but these friends happen to be of the opposite sex. Well, that may be a telltale sign that your relationship is starting to kind of damper a little bit. Most men and women understand that new friends of the opposite sex may not be quite so kosher with their mate. So make sure that if that's happening and that's on your no-no list, that you may want to take that under advisement and just figure out what's going on there. Now, if your spouse happens to have one of those jobs where they're traveling all around the world, they may pick up truly a new friend along the way. But there's nothing wrong with sitting down and having the conversation, especially if you haven't had that conversation before. Are we allowed to have new friends of the opposite sex? Number 2, he or she never says sorry. Now, this is a sign of some other issues as well. But if you aren't able to say, please, thank you, I'm sorry, forgive me, those types of statements, then there's a problem in your relationship anyway. But if the person was saying, I'm sorry or thank you before, and now they're slowly kind of cut that out of their vocabulary, then that could mean something. It doesn't mean your relationship is kaput. It just means that something is changing and your relationship is sliding towards a point that you probably don't want it to be. So kind of have a conversation and say, I noticed that we used to say these things and we don't say these things anymore. What's going on? Here's what's going on my end. Excuse me. Number 3, there are fewer terms of endearment, or generations of past used to call it pet names. So fewer terms of endearment. That means where you used to be like, hey babe, hey sweetie, honey, darling, sugar, my little pookie wookie, whatever your pet name was for your significant other. Now they're just kind of their name. Hey Lisa. Hey, Robert. Hey, Jack. How you doing there, Cassandra? There's no love when you address that person anymore. Now, if you're mad, you just had an argument and you're mad at that person, don't count that one. I'm talking about day-to-day endearment, where before that person would walk in and you were like, babe, hi, and now it's just, there's Frank. It may be a sign that something is going on. Now, all of these signs don't ultimately mean that your relationship is over. It just means that it's kind of sliding. There's a dip going on there. And if you don't address it, your relationship will be over. So, again, fewer terms of endearment. If you've noticed it, and especially if it bothers you, you may just want to have a little bit of a conversation. Honey, I liked it when you called me, fill in the blank. How come you don't call me that anymore? Who knows? What if they give you an explanation? It's like, well, you know what? I realized that I used to call my other girlfriend, my other boyfriend that, and when it dawned on me, I don't want to call you that. I want to create a new name for you. Be like, oh, and it's a whole misunderstanding. So there's nothing wrong with having that conversation. Well, we need to take a very short break, but when we get back, we will continue with our 5 signs that your relationship will be back right after this.
How do you feel knowing that you're terminal?
There's a possibility that I'm not. Still waiting on an appeal.
I think there's still something I need to find before all this is over.
Yeah, like what?
I don't know.
Man, most people these days, they know there's nothing after this. Heaven, paradise, whatever you want to call it.
Every time I bring up the possibility of hope, you're there to pull me back down again. But just because you lost your faith doesn't mean you're right. What if there's something to all of this?
And what if there's not?
Dead Man Rising.
Visit deadmanrisingthefilm.com and look for our upcoming Indiegogo campaign.
Well, if God is the box you wanna put me in, then go ahead and get the chains, man, and lock me on in. You can box me with God, box me with God. You can box me with God, box me with God. If this is the box that's gonna keep me from sin, go ahead and get the duct tape and seal me on in. You can box me with God, box me with God. You can box me with God, box me with God.
And we are back. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Modern Living with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. So today we are talking about 5 signs that your relationship is over. Now, again, if any of these things are happening and you just had an argument, then just include it with the argument. But if you've noticed that some of these things have been happening and time has been passing, we're talking about things that are becoming habit, and it's been longer than 90 days. Sometimes people just kind of get in a mood. They get in a little funk, and they need time to come back. If that's the case, don't count these things against the person. But again, if you've noticed that it's really been a while now and you can't remember when things were the way that they used to be, And these are some telltale signs that your relationship is definitely taking a dip. And if you don't address them, your relationship will be over. So we said that there are new friends around, and that would be new people of the opposite sex have started to be more and more in your significant other's life. They are unable to say sorry, thank you, please, those types of words. And the one we just mentioned was there are fewer terms of endearment, like honey, babe, sweetie, those types of things. Next is you are starting to daydream about being with someone else, or you're starting to daydream about a life without the other person. Now, I say it because even though they sound like they're kind of the same thing, they are and they aren't. Some people literally dream about being with someone else. So you, dear Robert, have now been replaced with Frank. And that's a different sign. However, Frank may be thinking of life without Lisa. He hasn't replaced her with Sarah. He just has a life without her. They are similar but a little bit different. It's kind of like having one A and then one B. Sometimes you can have one thought without the other, but many times people have both of them. They will start thinking about a life without that person, and then they will replace that person with someone else that they've become interested in. So you need to be really, really, really careful about that. If you've ever noticed, what is one of the questions that a counselor will ask, or even women may even ask in the beginning of the relationship? Can you see yourselves growing old together? Do you see that person in your future? If you don't, that's a sign, because usually the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, and especially ladies, we daydream about seeing you as an old person sitting with us. We imagine playing with our grandchildren with you. So if you're no longer doing that, you may want to sit down and talk and just kind of get an update. So, honey, where do you see us? Am I even in your life 10 years from now? If not, then you need to fix what's going on now, because it doesn't mean that you can't rearrange what's going on presently to be able to fix your future. The ultimate goal is just to communicate with each other and find out what's happening. Next is you keep things to yourself, meaning you stop talking about the small stuff. Now, I know that many people say, well, when something's getting me down, I really like to just, talk about it just amongst me, myself, and I internalize. I'm an introvert. I don't like to bother people with my problems. I'm a very private person. I got that. I understand. And that is true. So if you were trying to have an aha moment, people can be introverted and like to just try to figure out things themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem lies in when you stop discussing the small stuff. And the small stuff is when you used to walk in and go, oh, my God, let me tell you what happened at work today. Or, babe, let me run this by you. And you want the other person's interactions. If you used to do that and you're no longer doing that, then that may be a sign that that person is doing it with someone else. And I don't mean sexual. I mean that they're having, someone else is becoming their sounding board. Someone else is helping them sort through his or her life, which very well could be your life together in a relationship. Unfortunately, our friends do sometimes give us their 2 cents, and their 2 cents is, I never liked her in the first place. Get rid of her. I don't know what you see in him in the first place. Get rid of them because it's not their relationship. So you have to be really careful if you happen to be one of those people doing that. Because guess what? You're the one married to your spouse or in a relationship with your significant other, not them. And you chose that person for a particular reason. So try to focus more on the positives than on the negatives to help you figure out what's going on. Well, I'm going to give you a bonus here. And many people aren't going to quite understand, so forgive me if you catch on to it the very first time, but here we go. You're only having sex. Now, some people are like, hey, I'm having sex. That's a great thing. But if you and your spouse are only having sex and you're not doing anything else, again, you're not having the small talk, you're not going and making those new memories the way that you used to, then that's a telltale sign that something's going on in your relationship as well. For many people, it's, well, I'm getting everything but sex. Okay, well, if you used to have a lot of sex and now you're not, or if the only thing you're doing together is the sex, then it still means that the balance is off there, and you need to be really careful. So, again, you're only having sex. You have new friends that are around. You never say I'm sorry, please, or thank you. You're using fewer terms of endearment. You're daydreaming about a life with someone else or daydreaming about a life without your significant other, and you're keeping things to yourself where you used to not do that, are some signs that your relationship is on its way to being over. I hope that I have enlightened someone today and that you will sit down with your significant other and say, you know, I don't want it to be over. These are some things that I've noticed. Help me understand what's going on. All righty? If you take the stance of maybe, just maybe I'm contributing, it'll take a little bit of the edge off. Everything is not always the other person's fault. Remember, you're pointing at someone else, there's some fingers pointing back at you. So I hope that your relationship can definitely be fixed. If not, then perhaps you need to go to counseling if you can't do it yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. Well, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Modern Living with Dr. Angela. I hope to see you back here on next Tuesday as we discuss something else that affects the modern-day Christian. Have a great time, and may the Lord continue to bless you in all that you do. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Well, if God is the box you wanna put me in, then go ahead and get the chains, man, and lock me on in. You can box me with